And you are listening to Love the Afrobeat Music Talk Radio, your number one African Caribbean online radio. It's a Saturday, so if it's a Saturday, folks, and at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have a special program for you. As usual, yes, when AKOL is on the program with me, my brother here, it's so exciting because I know a lot of you out there are expecting some great conversation between myself and my brother from another mother from the same continent. Hey, we are joined together, and we are so proud to be Africans evermore to the last days where we are no more. Even underground will still be Africans. We cherish the continent so much. Folks, thank you for joining us today and sharing your space and time with us on Love the Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. Those of you listening to us online on the radio, we thank you for your time. And those of you watching us right now, we also appreciate your time. Today, we are going to have a very great conversation. The conversation is going to center around reforming so many institutions in Africa. Because you know what? We've gotten to a point in Africa where we have to cut ourselves from the vestiges of colonialism and then put everything onto the table for us to grow as a continent, because there's nothing wrong with Africa. There is absolutely nothing wrong with Africa. We need to reform institutions and, you know what, be on our own. We have to cut the vestiges of colonialism, which is drawing us back. But today, I'm so optimistic, trust me, my brothers and sisters, about the future of Africa. But we need to tighten so many things, change so many things that will augur us well into the future. And today I have my brother here, AKOL DOL. AKOL, how you doing, my brother? I know he's frozen, but I will come back to it.
Do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead, please.
How are you guys doing?
We're doing great, marvelously well. And it's so great to have you again on the program. It's so exciting. Anytime I see that we are going to have this conversation, this is your second stint here, but you've won over so many hearts in the United States of America, in South America, and so many places with your knowledge with respect to Africa and international affairs. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and Horus Consulting and everything before we go into the meat of things.
As always, it's a pleasure to be on here. We thank our brother for doing all this great work for Africa and for the greater diaspora. And for all of us who are passionate about Africa, it's good that we connect. And nowadays, with the age of technology, we have the ability to connect. Such as now I'm here in South Sudan and you are in Canada.
Toronto. Yeah.
Yeah. Me, I'm South Sudanese. I was born in South Sudan, but I grew up in the United States. I'm somebody who's been part of the African diaspora and also Africa here. When I was growing up, I got really exposed to the effects of being an African or being Black in the world, especially in the United States. And I developed a passion for Africa because I started to learn more about myself, where I came from, what my people are, and the role our people played in securing their freedom. When I went to the United States, the Sudan Civil War is going on, and the South Sudan the Sudan People's Liberation Army and movement was leading a push for South Sudan that resulted in the independence of South Sudan in 2011. So when I finished university, I decided to come back home and be part of home. I mean, there's no place like home. I really believe that home is the future, and that we should all basically aspire to be in Africa. We should all aspire to do something for our people, home and abroad. So here in South Sudan, I am leading a consultancy firm. I'm an entrepreneur. First, I love entrepreneurship. I love business. I think that's important as Africans for us to be in the business. I mean, business is something you can do even if you don't do it full-time or part-time. We live in a world of capitalistic society. And the reason we are weak as Africans because we lack strong economic power. It's what I do. I run a consultancy firm. And in this firm, we do different work. We do advisory on strategic communications, public relations, strategic advisory. So it's your basic boutique management consulting firm. And then we also do communication services production services, PR services, investment advisors. So if you're somebody interested and want to invest in South Sudan, reach out to us. We take care of you. We'll guide you on the investments in the country, advise you on the regulations, the rules, and the policies, and how best you can succeed in that environment. In addition to that, I'm an analyst and a writer. So I write extensively about South Sudan, about Africa, about global politics. I'm a contributor to CNBC Africa, to RT World. I've contributed to various media houses and the Love Bay Afrobeat talk show, of course, as
Yeah.
always. And so I really believe in the future of Africa. And I really believe that all of us have to really do our best to change the conversations and have a conversation that's much more unique about the future of Africa.
Thank you very much. And um, before we start, uh, one thing that I'm looking at every day when I take something to read about Africa, well, we just came out of the so-called Black History Month, but it's got to be Black History Day every day. Our history cannot be compressed into 27 days. That's the shortest month of the year. We have
Mm-hmm.
a thousand years of history that we can learn every day. Well, the topic for today will be reforming African institutions towards the future. And I was
Mm-hmm.
reading something just before we came on air. I was reading something from the African Union. You know, my heart is not on the African Union, but today I will try as much as possible to contain myself because, to me personally, a lot could be done and can be done and should be done where African Union is concerned in terms of the overall governance of Africa. What I read was
Mm-hmm.
that in 2016, says African leaders decided that institutional reforms in the African Union was urgent and necessary given the role the AU is expected to play in drawing and achieving Africa's Agenda 2063 vision of inclusive and economic growth and development. Hmm, something like this. What have we seen?
Well, I think when you talk about the African Union, I mean, the topic is, I would say the topic is a vague topic.
I
And
know.
we have to also, as we saw last time in the episode that we did last time,
Yeah.
we have to have some sense of mercy when we deal with these institutions because some of these institutions are a byproduct of former colonial institutions. Some of these institutions are mimicry of multilateral or other global lateral institutions, to say that. The African Union in itself is a descendant of the Organization of African Unity. And the idea of the Organization of African Unity, if you think about it, the first Organization of African Unity conference that took place, it was led by Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana. So some of the leaders of the original OAU in the 60s, in the 50s and 60s when they met, when those of Nkrumah, Haile Selassie, Julius Nyerere, when these revolutionary founders, even Ahmed Seko of Guinea, when they met, their primary objective was to get the independence of these African countries. If you think about it, or Happy Independence Day for Ghana, March 6th. So March 6th, 1957,
What
Ghana is
did
one
you?
of the first
What?
countries.
Let me interject. What did you say? Happy Independence. Happy Dependence Day or Independence?
Yeah, dependence, but yeah, we're still dependent.
All right.
So in
Go
March
ahead.
6th, so if you
Uh,
look at the trajectory, uh, some of the first countries to get their independence was Sudan in 1956, then Ghana 57. So when Kwame Nkrumah and his leadership, when they got started getting independence, and then you saw later in 1960, 1961, you saw a lot of countries. 1960 was a big year for independence for African countries, especially the former French countries, the former Belgian country, even the Congo got its independence in 1960 in June. The objective of the organization of African unity was to get the independence of other countries, right? So it became a union where we believe that some of us have gotten out. It's a way for some of us to go back and get others out as well. So if I'm an African leader and I've got my independence, I am obligated to support the independence of my brothers and sisters, correct? Which means the same thing you saw in the southern African countries. Angola and Mozambique were still under Portuguese rule until 1975. That's why if you look at the role that was played by Julius Nyerere in Tanzania, in Mozambique, it's a big role. He tried to support the Frelimo movement and he supported even Samora Machel spent time in Tanzania. They were trading Tanzania because at that point Julius Nyerere on that side, he really wanted to focus on getting the independence. The same way how people supported the ANC, how people supported ZANU PF in Zambia, how people supported Kenneth Kahunda in Zambia. I mean, mistake. ZANU PF is in Zimbabwe, Kenneth Kahunda is in Zambia. So the original objective was we need to become independent from our former colonial rulers. That objective really motivated us as Africans, where what brought us together was that we don't want to see another African country oppressed by former colonial rulers. So therefore, it's in our vested interest to work collectively to liberate ourselves from the oppression and the marginalization of former colonial leaders. And you'd find that the most recent you can see with the country to get independence recently from it is Namibia, the SWAPO, the Southwest African Political Organization, which was led by Sam and Jumo. And those guys in Namibia, they got their independence really late, and they're still under the South Africans. Namibia's history is complicated because it was originally a German colony. Same with Tanzania, Cameroon, in Burundi, and what's it called? And Rwanda. They were German colonies that ended up being given away. And the irony is that World War I is a war about you can oppress the black man, but the white man is okay. The white man is off limits because they had colonies. So the original objectives, to cut long story short, was we need to get together and liberate ourselves. Now we have our independence. We have independence. We don't have that same enthusiasm and the same fire because we had a singular goal that we wanted to achieve, which was the independence of these African countries from the French, from the British, from the Belgians, from the Portuguese, even the Spanish. I mean, the Equatorial Guinea was a Spanish colony. Now we get our independence. The African Union is a birth child of that, where the objective of the African Union is now development. Let's work collectively together to develop. We got our independence because before we can have a Pan-African vision, we need to be liberated from the enemies of Pan-Africanism. Unfortunately, now the enemies of Pan-Africanism are no longer in European or Western capitals. Some of them are sitting in African capitals.
Yes.
Because some of them have decided to be mules and agents of the anti-imperialism. And so instead of worrying about, well, I'm a colony of the British, I'm a colony of the French, you had African leaders who legitimately believed that it's better that we have a strong relationship with the West than a strong relationship with our African brothers. You saw this with like the president of Ivory Coast, Felix Boigny. Felix Boigny was very close with the French, and he had a lot of problems with Nkrumah. You had people like in Malawi, Hastings Kalanzo Banda, who at one point legitimately justified maintaining a relationship with South Africa for economic and political purposes, as opposed to supporting the Mozambique Frelimo movement, which is justified because he makes the argument, I'm getting support from the South Africans, and it's not in my interest to destroy that relationship. And I don't want to support ZANU PF. I don't support these other movements. You had instances when Mobutu had a good relationship with the West, he was really against the Angolan civil war. He was against the Angolan independence. At some point, he wouldn't allow the MPLA to work as a point, because at some point during the Angola Civil War, there was three fronts. There was UNITA, which was led by Jonas Savimbi, and then there was the MPLA, and then there was what's it called? FNLA. FNLA was led by Holden Roberto. Holden Roberto was from the Bakongo people, and the Bakongo people, they're both in Angola and they're in the Congo. So Mobutu felt like that was a threat to him because Holden Roberto was espousing Bakongo nationalism, that we also need to leave Angola and leave Congo and have our own state. So indirectly, what was happening was Mobutu was trying to ensure that these movements don't become powerful. Roberto ended up aligning with the MPLA, which was led by Agostino Neto. So that's just some history. So we have such a complicated and messy history that we have to be really careful. Like the African Union is not a body that was established with a clear objective. It was basically like, well, they have a European Union, let's have an African Union. And in development studies, the term for this is called isomorphic mimicry, where basically developing countries just copy what a Western country has done without understanding the objectives of that. Such as in many African countries, you hear, oh, well, we have this commission, we have this agency, we have this department of whatever. Well, because you saw that in the West. Like now you have the same structures because you'll say, well, in America, they have an IRS, Internal Revenue. Let's follow that same structure because it makes us look like we're developing. But developing is addressing realistic challenges. Development isn't building nice buildings. Development is addressing the key problems facing your constituency. Because if we decide to say, well, this is the Africa you don't see, and we're building buildings, towers owned by French or Americans, that's not development, and our people are still hungry. But if we say, look, guys, Ghana, Ivory Coast, and these cocoa producing countries are not making enough money and they're producing most of the cocoa. How can we increase the value chain? How can we make sure that more money is going to the poor cocoa farmer? So now, if Theo is a poor cocoa farmer, why is he making small money? But Nestle and Hershey's are billion-dollar corporations. That's preposterous, very preposterous. But instead of addressing these things, we want to build nice buildings. We want to build airports. We want to build infrastructure because that's what a country does. Because a leader will say, well, I traveled to this country in China, or I mean, this country in Asia, or this country in the West. They have big airports. So let's invest $100 million in building a big airport. But maybe that money could have been used to stimulate the economy, to invest in agriculture, to ensure that we no longer are food reliant. So the developmental challenges is being practical. But unfortunately, the African Union and many of us now believe that trying to be Western is the best solution. Trying to follow these Western models is the best solution. And that's why it's important that we study why these Western countries have these institutions and have these agencies and have these structures, because those structures are necessary for the way they live their lives. In Africa, whether we like it or not, we cannot neglect the role of the traditional authority, the traditional chiefs.
Mhm.
Those are important. They are an aspect of our society, and they're an aspect of how we live our lives. So if you set up a government structure and you have a legislature, you have an executive, you have a judiciary, well, when we get married as Africans, we don't go to the court. We do traditional marriages. We go to our families.
Mhm.
Those structures are also important. But if we say, you know what, we're going to have a strong legal system based on British common law or based on precedent, and these terms that we learned in these advanced school, and we go back and you find the village chief who's like, wait a second, historically our ancestors had a way of solving land issues. They
Mhm.
had a way of addressing communal violence. But now we're going to the West. So that's how I want to start the conversation. You can add
But
something.
yes, from where I sit, I think the Organization of African Union preceded the AU. It had its own
Mm.
structures, right? The understanding of the Nkrumahs and those guys who were the founding fathers of the Organization of African Union. But I think when the AU was formed, it deviated one way or the other, or it didn't find its feet, or it hasn't found its feet as to why it was created. But let me go to the East African scene for a moment. We had the East African Economic Community back in the day. They had East
Uh-huh.
African Airlines and all those. It worked. It really, really worked. And for some reason, it collapsed. Why? Why did it collapse? That's one thing. And from where I sit, I think it started on a very good foot. So everything that we have done, one way or the other, what I'm trying to drive at is that there'll be, like in our African speak, in our proverb, it says, if you're pulling a rope or a string and it's not coming, it means something is holding it. What do you think? What do you think has been holding us back from, not even copying, not mimicking? Like just like you said rightly, we had our own institutions, we had everything that worked for us. So why is it that right now we want to mimic something that is alien to us? And why
Hmm.
can't we sit back and say, you know what, we've had this for so many generations. Now let's sit back, let's have the conversation and reform so many institutions that are still tied in to the vestiges of colonialism. Your take on it, please.
Okay, I'll take it. So the East Africa Economic Counts community is no more, but now you have an East Africa community. Um, the East Africa, the way it was established, the original one, was established as an economic union with an aspiration to have an independent East African state, right? And this is why I say in Africa we have so much competing agendas and plans, and we're not honest about it. Like there's some people who want one African state. There's some people who want a West African state. Some people want an East Africa. Some countries even say, no, I don't want to be with this country. I want a federation with that country. You have some countries say we should use this currency. We should use that currency. No, this thing is addressing these things. So let's take it piecemeal. The East Africa community, if you think about it, it was a project by Julius Nyerere. That's why you see the headquarters. And what in the middle, as African personalities, when they start getting together, they will fight. That's why the EU is toothless, because you have so much personalities there who are going to disagree. I mean, you're the president of Nigeria, you think you're a heavyweight. You're the president of South Africa, you think, hey, I'm a heavyweight. You're the president of Kenya, you're a heavyweight. If you're a president of any country, you're going to believe that you are somebody who's a big dog. So the issues of that community became when regional conflicts started to happen. At the time in the 70s and 80s, it's particularly Julius Nyerere was a strong man. And during the Julius Nyerere time in the 70s, you had the rule of Idi Amin. And Idi Amin has his own way. We all know Idi Amin. And then you had, after the passing of Jomo Kenyatta, you had Daniel Arap Moi as the president of Kenya. So now these people, they're going to come with a different ideology. Yes. So before, you were dealing with Jomo Kenyatta, who's a founding father. And then now you're dealing with a new guy. So it became a challenge of getting people on board. The number one challenge is going to be, well, okay, we're going to be a union. Who's going to be the head of state? Who's going to be the leader? Okay, man, now I'm already a president of my country. Why would I give into my sovereignty for you guys to be? And that's the issue you have now. What I say, this regional multilateralism in Africa, where until you agree that we have to take a gradual step first towards regional multilateralism and regional integration, we can't move forward. Now with the African Union, you have the African Union, and the African Union has grown now. You have 8 member states. You have the DRC, Congo, you have South Sudan, you have Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, and you have Somalia and Tanzania. So you have these countries, and the step that they want to take is economic integration, because people are starting to realize that, okay, we have to first address our economic issues because we are not equipped, or let me say economically or commercially equipped to compete with the world. So the idea is like, now let us create a union that can address economic challenges. And this union has to address our uniqueness. So if we can have a union where we can become productive and economically strong, then we can take the next step towards political integration. And I firmly believe political integration is impossible in Africa. If people are fighting in their countries already to be presidents, imagine what's going to happen if we have multiple countries becoming one. People are going to fight for who's the head of the state. And if people are fighting over, okay, this country, but then there's some countries who believe like, I'm already powerful. Why would I support, for example, you're the president of country X, I'm president of country Y. My country is economically strong. I don't want to subsidize your country. And this is a complaint that you get in ECOWAS. Nigeria believes economically it's better off without ECOWAS, because Nigeria has $1 billion economy, it's the best economy in Africa. It believes that it can weigh, other countries are weighing it down. So what happens indirectly? Nigeria starts to dictate the terms of ECOWAS based on its contribution. The same way, remember when Donald Trump said, well, America donates a lot to NATO in UN. We have a right to tell them what to do. That's going to happen in these regional bodies because that's the reality of politics. Some countries contribute more than others. Some countries have stronger economies. Some countries have better militaries. So these regional bodies, I think we should stop having a lot of expectations for them. We should give them a chance to develop. But before we can go into that regional body, we have to develop locally as countries, because every country has its own revenue. What is sovereignty? Sovereignty is your own economy, meaning you regulate your currency. Sovereignty is a monopoly on violence. You control your own military. Sovereignty is you controlling your own borders. Controlling your own borders means that you issue passports, work visas, customs, etc. Okay, if I decide to say I'm going to enter a union, and number one, I'm going to have a currency that's controlled by the region. I've lost my economic power
Yeah.
because the power a country gets is in its currency.
Mhm.
If it's the South Sudan pine, Kenyan, Ugandan shilling, the Ghanaian city, the the kwacha, the kwanza, all these different currencies in Africa, I want to control them. So now if I'm ceding some of my sovereignty. Number two, there's the issue of customs and borders. Now people are saying, well, if you're in these economic regions, you can't force somebody from entering. They get visa on arrival, or they don't have to pay a work permit. Once again, now I'm ceding some of my sovereignty because I have borders, and as a country, and these borders dictate what types of privileges that I give my citizens, and these borders dictate what is a citizen versus what is not a citizen. Because if these drawn lines that I draw, this is Ghana, this is Cameroon, this is South Sudan. And if you are from this country, you have to get a passport and pay my fee. Then there's a common customs union. Well, no, if you're in this union, and people are even pushing for the a common Africa customs. So now, then what's the point of having a customs department in any African country? Just everybody should move in freely. But now,
Mhm.
if you some of these powers to a regional or a continental body, you're losing your sovereignty. And next is the security. People are going as far as that we should have regional military forces where you contribute, and this military force has the legitimacy and the monopoly of violence to intervene into conflicts. The precedent you can see was in Gambia when President Yahya refused to come down, and the ECOWAS threatened to intervene militarily. I really believe that I don't think they would have intervened because look what happened in Guinea. Look what happened in Burkina Faso. Look what's happened in Gabon. Look what happened in Mali. They've threatened recently in Niger. They threatened. They said, "You know what? We're going to ensure that Mohamed Bazoum is reinstated." And what happened? They said they're going to intervene. What happened immediately? Those countries they left ECOWAS. They said, "We'll just leave. There's nothing binding us here. As we don't have to be part of this." So if you start saying, "Well, we need to have a Pan African continental issue," we can't regionally get along with each other. If now Tanzania is having a trade war with Kenya, Uganda is having trade issues with South Sudan, for example. Every country wants to cement its authority. Rwanda and Burundi are neighbors. I mean, at one point it was one country. It was called Rwanda, Burundi. It was one.
Mhm. Yeah. Mhm.
Now they
Mhm.
can't get a
Mhm.
Congo. President Tshisekedi has said that recently. If I meet Kagame in heaven, I won't even meet him. If I go to heaven and I see Kagame, I won't meet him because of the issues that's happening with the M23 rebels in the northern Kivu region of the Congo. So why are we talking about African continental unity? It's impractical. It's possible, but currently based on the certain things that is happening, because you have ECOWAS, you have Central Africa Community, you have SADC countries, you have East Africa Community, you have the North African states who they firmly believe that they're their own. Then you have the Horn of Africa. The Horn of Africa, they don't get along. Ethiopia and Eritrea were one country at one point, and just recently they made peace. Ethiopia is trying to get a port from Somalia, and Somalia even has issues in Somaliland. That's why when I say Africa is not a monolith, let's learn the different things that we have, things that make us similar, but there's things that separate us. So this is why I personally call the African Union a toothless organization
Of course,
because it is.
it is.
I'll give you an example. When you had the coups happening in West Africa, they had one point, the president of Nigeria, the former president, Muhammadu Buhari,
Buhari, yeah.
Buhari was speaking about how we need to stop coups. Buhari overthrew the government of Shageri in 1983.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
1983, Shishu Shageri was democratic elected in 1979 after Obasanjo's first term. Obasanjo came when Muhammad Murtala was killed in 1976. Obasanjo took over. Obasanjo then handed over, and the election happened, and Shishu Shigera was elected. Buhari overthrew the government of a Democratic elected person, and now he came back again. He's going to the Afro Union talking about military coups are not the way forward. Well, if I'm a leader who just did a military coup, I'm going to tell you, who are you to talk to me?
That's right.
You can't talk to me.
Mhm.
Many of the leaders in these African countries got to power through military.
Mhm.
Let's not admit it. Let's go through Africa. In South Sudan, the SPLM, SPLA militarily was successful, and that's how we got South Sudan. We have to accept that reality. The NRM of Uganda got to power. RPF got to power. Um, MPLA, Frelimo, ZANU PF, all these were movements. They didn't get there. I mean, yes, they end up having elections later. So when you start saying that we need to demilitarize African culture, that's half the country. That's half the continent. You have people who are historic military leaders. Even some of our most popular leaders that we love did coups. Uh,
Mhm.
Thomas Sankara did a coup. That's how he got to power, and he did a coup in 1983. Um,
You see,
Jerry J. Rawlins.
yeah, but sorry about that. But if you come to look at it, you were talking about ceding sovereignty. But if you don't cede sovereignty, what do we have? Because at some point in time, you have to cede just a little. Little drops of water makes the mighty ocean. So if you are not ready to sort of cede a little bit of your sovereignty for the good of the whole continent, then it means we are not making any strides. Because if you talk about Agenda 2063, then what are you talking about? It will be inherent in there that something will be there that may push you one way or the other to see the sovereignty, one way or the other. You take on it.
But okay, when you talk about these agenda yada yada yada, those are really nice. It's like the UN Sustainable Development, the three pillars or the multiple pillars, and all these things. It's a good thing to talk about. But okay, the topic is today is reforming African institutions.
Yep.
Once again, the word reform, I feel as if is a word that we just should need to stop using it. We haven't been formed. You reform something that's already formed. It's like a renovation. You build your house and then say, you know what, I want to make these necessary changes in my windows. I want to do this. But we haven't built anything. We don't have effective institutions. And the reason we don't have effective institutions is because we are not practical. Okay, number one, the African Union immediately needs to agree, hey, in the next 15 years, we need to be a net exporter. That's the way we should be talking.
Mm-hmm.
In the next 10 years, we need to be food secure. Why are we importing grain and wheat from Ukraine? My goodness. Why? Why are we until now importing refined petroleum products when we are a net exporter of crude oil? And that's
Toothpick,
why I applaud the
toothpick,
initiative.
toothpick,
Huh?
toothpick.
Tooth. Yeah.
Yeah, we import
Why is
toothpick.
we import toothpick? We have our traditional things. Okay. We have farms that can grow cotton. We have land to grow food. We can manufacture. We have so many people who've gone to the West, who've traveled around, who have the ability to manufacture and run these companies. We have people of work. Why can't we do them in Africa? The first priority as Africans is the economic power. Let's stop all these institutions, these regional things. Let's start with getting our economic power back. Remember, there was a saying that was said after the African independence. They said, give them the parliament, we'll take the banks. Okay, we have the parliament. Let's go get the banks. Let's control the economics. And if you look at the China model, what made these Eastern like I'll give you guys an example. In the 1970s, at some point, Chinese used to come to Africa. The Chinese used to ask Nigeria for loans. 60s and 70s. Korea once used to send delegations to Africa. Korea. These Asian countries were struggling, but what does the Asian countries have that we don't have? Economic power. Their economic power is predicated on their ability to produce things domestically. Korea, they have said we're going to manufacture electronics. Samsung is competing with Apple. I mean, even me, I have a Samsung phone. Okay. What they've done also, they've gone to the point where they can produce things locally, microchips. In Taiwan, they produce microchips. China is become the master of manufacturing and the master of just production. China has said we're the place of production. Vietnam, all these different things. You go to India, India's massive economic transportation is because they produce things. I mean, India's textile industry, India's food production industry, India's agriculture industry, their technology industry is all very local. Okay, they did that. Why can't we manufacture phones, an African phone? Why can't we make chocolate? Why do we need to eat Hershey's and Nestle, why can't Ghanaians, West Africans, Africans, East make their own chocolate and just sell it? Hey, this is the new chocolate, African chocolate. The same way Samsung at one point was nothing, but they built into a global product. China has all these different global products. What is a global African product that people use besides wearing those African attire? That's it. All they wear is those nice colored shirts. But what is one product we can say? We have a phone, we have a car, we can do it. What making a car? I mean, in Nigeria, they try to do it. They try to do cars and manufacturing, but obviously people don't want to buy. I mean, people want to have the Lexus, they want the Toyota. But why can't we say, wait, how does that Toyota build their cars? Okay, if it's steel, we have steel. If it's resource, we have resource. Let's build it here and let's have our own African car.
We have everything.
We have everything. That's why they say poverty is a mindset, not based on what you have in your pocket.
Folks, we are in conversation with a great AKOL DOL, an entrepreneur, founder of Always Consulting, a writer, an analyst. Yeah, we are having a conversation. He's in South Sudan, and by way of technology, I'm in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And we are having this conversation with respect to Africa. Whenever we come here on Saturdays at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, it's the love of Africa and nothing but the love of Africa and how we can, solve our problems because, every household has a problem. Even our hands, our fingers are not the same. And we can agree to disagree with you out there. But if you want to join in the conversation, yes, hey, by all means, join in there. A lot of people are joining in the conversation. And yes, let me go to ECOWAS. When right now there's a problem in paradise. If I say a problem in paradise, I'm talking in terms of Senegal. I'm talking in terms of Senegal. Where is the African? Where is the ECOWAS? Where is ECOWAS to place sanctions on Senegal? 3 other countries did it, and then ECOWAS was just ready to pounce on them. But now we have the same thing there. Where is ECOWAS? And if
but
go ahead, just go.
I mean, look,
take it away.
Let's be fair. Unfortunately, power is something nice, and you can't really blame President Macky Sall because he tasted power. He said that he spoke openly about why he doesn't like how leaders overstay their place in power, and now he tried to get an extension and subvert. I mean, he wants to groom his successor, and many people are resisting it. They're resisting this whole godfathership that if I leave power, I have to bring my plan and stay relevant. The thing, you get your 8 years, 10 years, and you go home. Go do other things. Be an elder statesman. But okay. You say why is the ECOWAS not sanctioning? Why would they act? They failed to act when a military coup happened. This guy wants to extend his power a couple months. I mean, like, once again, it goes to the point where we have to level our expectations with these regional institutions. Okay. Right now, as we speak, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have just withdrawn from ECOWAS.
Yes.
They said, we don't want to work with you. Okay. ECOWAS, when they withdraw, I mean, Senegal can just say, we're going to withdraw as well, because these regional bodies don't have a vision anymore. We don't have a vision when it comes to these, like that. If it's the African Union, or if ECOWAS, or EAC, or SADC, or the Central African, or CAMESA, all these nice acronyms, they don't have a vision. So, okay, how would ECOWAS sanction Senegal? What would you do? Okay, the power that you have is you could suspend them, but if you suspend them, now they're no longer going to be involved. They're going to go the other way to say, we don't need you guys anyways. What are you guys going to do? You do nothing for us. But if you decide to suspend them and you say, well, we're going to suspend you guys, you're no longer part of this body. Okay, good. Thank you. We there's nothing we benefit. We're saving money because the only thing we get from this body is nothing, but we pay a lot of fees. So when we say, where's ECOWAS? ECOWAS is where it is. It's always going to be. Same place with all these regional bodies. Like, look at Congo. The DRC. The DRC is a member of both SADC and a member of EAC. And it's people are screaming. Even I have an article I wrote about it because the president of EAC is my president. President Salva Kiir is president of EAC, and he's trying to. He went to Rwanda, went to Burundi, but there's issues because now if you're seen as close to Kagame, they said no, you're close with Kagame. Kagame is sponsoring M23. If you're close with Tshisekedi, Kagame said no, you're close with Tshisekedi. Okay, what do you do? How do you mediate conflict? Okay, now you have João Lourenço, the president of Angola, who's also the head of chairperson of SADC, mediating. Then you have on the EAC side, President Salva Kiir, the chairperson of the EAC, me having a mediation team. All these different things, but yet, like it's hard to get people to the table. So many of these regional bodies, they don't get along. They don't like each other. They really don't. And if people also don't want to be the person to suspend it, I mean, look at it now. Bola Tinubu doesn't want to start issues. He's like, if you're head of a regional body, you have 1 year, you'll be gone. You're like, I'm not going to be the one to create issues. Let them do what they want to do.
So he started it.
He started it, but
he started it.
Yeah,
and he had to go back and in a way plead with the military.
He had to backtrack.
That's right.
He had to backtrack.
That's right. So this is where the whole thing comes about. The main purpose of forming ECOWAS, as General Gowon and a champion and all those guys.
But Gowon created it, and how did Gowon get to power?
Through a coup.
Through a coup.
That's right.
Right. So how did Gowon get to power? Okay.
Right.
If you look at ECOWAS, okay, continue. I'll add that later.
No. Go ahead, please. Go ahead, please.
Okay, the founders of ECOWAS were all military leaders.
Yes, a champion and all those guys.
I mean, okay, it was founded in 1975.
Yeah.
In 1975, one of the people who were leading ECOWAS was Yakubu Gowon. Gowon came to power through a coup. He overthrew a government. So now, if we're ECOWAS, we're saying, well, our original vision isn't we like coups in Africa or West Africa. Half of your leaders have been coup plotters. Half of the people who have led this body have been people who took over through a coup. All right? And Gowon, okay. It's like, okay, it's like I say this about Obasanjo, right? Obasanjo has lived the tale of two lives, right? He was somebody who in 1975, okay, Obasanjo and Murtala Odon who overthrew Gowon in 1975. And get this, Gowon was overthrown in July, I think July 1975, as an OAU summit in Kampala. Yes. He was overthrown while he was sitting on the floor of the summit. They came and told him that you've been overthrown. And the people who overthrew him was Muhammad Murtala and Olusegun Obasanjo. And then 8 months later, in 1976, in May, correct me if I'm wrong, February, I think, listen, you can correct our history. Murtala was assassinated in the failed coup of Dima Duka. And then in that, who came as president? Olusegun Obasanjo. Obasanjo, at one point, was a military dictator from 1976 to 1979. Now Obasanjo is a pioneer defender of elections, of democracy, and all, but you cannot erase the history. And then he came back in 1999 after he had his issues with what's it called? Not Shigeri. I forgot. I forgot his name.
You mean the president?
No, the guy who came after.
There have been several of them. There have been several of them, so it's really difficult to.
Yeah. Okay. He came. I remember the list. So then he came and he ran for president. And then Abacha. Yes, Sani Abacha. Abacha jailed him, and he was there. So now he comes into power and he wins an election. Another thing, what's so interesting about African history is that in Nigeria, the military people left the military and went to the political scene. They created political parties. I mean, you have the APC, the PDP, all these really nice acronyms. Some of these people were military leaders in their past. They said, okay, I'm a retired general. But we cannot ignore some of these people's past because their past is still part of the present. And that's why a lot of people say that we have impunity in Africa, because you have leaders who were part of insurgencies, part of coups, who are now running around talking about democracy. So when you say ECOWAS, founded by Goan, who was Goan? How did Goan get to power? And now ECOWAS is saying, no, part of our principles is we don't like coups. Okay, well, the people who founded your movement were coup plotters.
But at least they sowed the seed. So the idea was there. But after them, those people who took over, I would presume that they would have thought, okay, you know what? We mean well. They meant well. So why don't we continue with that idea? Because the whole idea was to trade among ourselves and then make the people within the region good. But then, even if you come to look at it, not even a single currency that they all can say that, you know what? Let's use this. They came out with ECHO. Like I'm saying, if you pull a string and something is holding it, and it's not coming out, it means something is holding it. They were blaming France because France had an issue, or Nigeria had an issue with France with the Biafra war because France supported Biafra. And all
Yes.
there's a lot of things that is in there. But despite that, I think it's gotten to a point where we have to sit back and look at certain institutions. The institutions, I mean, with respect to presence in the United Nations, a continent of about 1.2 billion people who don't have a seat at the table at the UN Security Council. You've addressed this before, but you see, these are some of the things that I think we can sit back and have a conversation with about, and then seriously think about reforming those institutions, because those institutions are also tied up with vestiges of colonialism.
But okay, you talk about trade, right?
Yeah.
This is another thing you mentioned, a good point. Why do you have these bodies that don't want to condemn each other? I mean, Ghana has a big economy. I mean, if you think of that, why would you want to sanction a country with, would you have good relationship with? I mean, if you look at in the EAC, I mean, ECOWAS, my bad. Ghana has the second biggest economy in ECOWAS after Nigeria. So why would you sanction them? I mean, how many business interests do you have? So Ghana can basically say, well, you guys don't want me. Okay, then we'll leave. But who is, for example, Guinea-Bissau, Gambia, Cape Verde, Nigeria, Guinea, Burkina, to come tell me that you don't want me in this union? This is an economic union. Why are you getting involved in my internal political issues? And that's how many countries view it. Like, what do you want from me? And when you talk about trade, you have to talk about how if I'm a country who's importing goods from Ghana, and at the same time I want to tell them I'm going to sanction you, I'm gonna, you know what? I need the resources. I need the resources. Unfortunately, you provide me something. For example, if the guy who supplies you with milk, I hate to say this, starts, let me say, abusing his children, you say, you know what? I'm gonna take a stand against you. You're not gonna have milk anymore.
That's right.
And I know that's a great example. They might say, who are you? I supply you with milk and you put me, or maybe let's say you sell him grain, or let's say my biggest market is Nigeria and Ghana for food or whatever. I'm gonna be like, wait a second, you can't come and tell me with this. And then also another thing, you think about it. I want to mention this. We're here, so you have some countries who use the Central African franc, right? You have Ivory Coast, Senegal, Mali, Burkina Faso, Benin, Niger. What is the other one? Togo.
Yeah.
And Guinea-Bissau. Okay, then Ghana uses the Naira. No,
And
Ghana uses the Cedi.
Yeah.
And Naira is Nigeria. Guinea uses the franc. And Liberia uses the Liberian dollar. And Sierra uses the Leone. Okay, what kind of economic union is that if there's so many currencies out there?
Precisely.
Some countries, like for example, if you're Ivory Coast, you can say, hey, I've done what's on my side. And then you look at also, okay, Senegal. Senegal uses that the Central African franc. Who are you now to come and tell countries who've done this? I'll give you an example. Senegal has its own, uses the Central African franc, but Ghana uses the cedi and the naira. So if you come and try to sanction Senegal and tell them you have not had an election, they'll tell you we follow the rules. You have your currency. Nigeria, you have the naira. You haven't used the franc. Who are you to come and tell us? Ghana. Okay, here's the economies: Nigeria, Ghana, Ivory Coast, Senegal. Senegal is the fourth largest economy in the ECOWAS. I confirm it was Ghana is the second. Senegal has been following the rules. And they're the second largest economy that uses the franc. So now, if you go in a setting and you talk about how, as the ECOWAS, we need to have regional cooperation and work together and follow the rules. Okay, I may be extending my elections, but you haven't bought into the economic rules. You have your own currency. So that's how you see. Now you know why some of these regional bodies they collapse, because there's so much group dynamics and internal dynamics involved that get them to disagree with each other, because those are claims that you'll make. And you have to put yourself in some of these people's shoes. They owe it to their own countries, such as Senegal owes it to Senegalese, Nigeria to Nigerians, Ghanaians to Ghanaians, etc. So now if you say, well, you have to follow this regional body, they're going to say, who are you? So it's hard to sanction. I mean, you can sanction, you can suspend, but what is it going to achieve? What political leverage do you have against them? And if you decide to start a trade war, hey, we're no longer going to purchase products from Senegal. They're going to say, okay, we'll find a new market. And also, as a business person, how much money have I lost if I'm no longer buying this product? These products are necessary in the market. So now, if I'm not able to supply the market with products from Senegal, the public in my country is going to ask me, what's going on? Well, how come I don't have this product? They say, well, we're boycotting it because Senegal hadn't had its elections. They're going to say, I don't care about how they had the elections. I want my business. So see the balances of the economic side and the political side. It's a fine balance. And then there's the sovereignty side.
But then at the end of it all, I mean, we're looking at it about the problems and all those kind of things. I think it all boils down to leadership. It all boils down to leadership, because if within a country, something is not going right, and then you're supposed to change it, you don't change it. Like, even let me digress a little bit. You spoke about EU, for instance. The East African Economic Community was there before the EU. It was there before the EU, but then it has and it went down. People are saying, I had some conversations saying that, well, because of how it was developing into a huge global kind of entity, that's the reason why there was some infiltration, and the West, so came in and then broke it apart, because they are saying that anything that we do, you get somebody from within us. Like Father Kosa once said, we elect people from among us. Once they get out of us, from where they got the power, they change completely. I think the leaders know what it takes to reform all these institutions, especially education. Especially education.
Okay.
If you don't reform
you mentioned a good point.
Go ahead, please.
You mentioned a good point, right?
Go ahead.
You said the EU. Why was the EU created? The EU was created because Europe had 2 world wars, and the idea of an economic union was that it's like mutually assured destruction, meaning that if we decide to go to war again, we're all going to go down. Therefore, it's in our best interest to prevent any kind of conflict. And in the EU, everybody has bought into the euro. Everybody has bought into the Schengen zone. I mean, except Britain. And Britain, at least, was very honest and very open and decided to say, we're going to leave the EU. We don't want to be a part of this union. And in the EU model, basic model, you find a European model was a common currency, a common political union. But once again, we cannot use the same institutions in Africa. And this is why when developmental strategists talk about isomorphic mimicry, they mean that you cannot copy the same set structures, institutions, and then believe that they're going to work in your environment without understanding the reason from those institutions and those structures in that set environment. Europe, since 1914, 1918, they had a world war. 1939 to 1945, they had a world war. The EU, and then from 1945 until the 90s, you had a Cold War. You had Europe, who was gripped in the middle. You had the Soviet bloc countries. you had the American bloc countries, even you had Berlin, you had East and West Germany. These were split. So Europe had to understand that we could no longer function like this. Therefore, it's in our best interest to swallow our pride, agree on a political and economic union, and this political and economic union is going to protect us and unify us. It's going to prevent us from fighting with each other in the future. And this political and economic union, the basis of it is histories of European war. Before World War One, Europe was going to war. The British and the French, they didn't get along. The French and the Germans, they didn't get along. The Spanish and the Portuguese, they didn't get along. The Russians and the Austrian. I mean, think about it. Many of these European countries in 1914, you had the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. You had all the different countries, and Europe has politically matured and developed because it was able to identify its core issues. What is our real issues? We're fighting over influence. Let's all intertwine ourselves economically and politically. Therefore, we can have a European Union, and the European Union is an economic and political union. If you get a visa to go to Germany, you can also go to France. It's a Schengen visa. If you have euros and you travel, you won't have to change them. The euro. That's their situation. But they also had a certain level of development. They had a certain level of practicality to it. But you cannot apply that same strategy because when Europe was having its first world war, there was no African countries. They were still colonizing us. And Europeans are former colonizers. They had these issues. But that's why we want to talk about African unity. We need to have economic interdependence amongst ourselves because if you have economic power, you have political power. So
Yes, yes. Yeah, you do. Yeah, if you have economic power, you have political power. Yeah, it is a fact. But I think at the end of the day, we can continue with these conversations because it's very essential. We have to talk to each other because
yeah.
we have become, Africa has become, is in the crosshairs of so many different organizations and countries and blocks and stuff like that. So if we don't, like Kwame Nkrumah said at one point, he says, if we don't take care, the next phase of neocolonialism will be more brutal than the first. And we are experiencing certain things that, what, we are trying to be independent, but at the same time, too, we have leaders who are not, thinking ahead of, ahead of time. And it seems as if we are at the same place. We are not moving anywhere. So, like somebody said one time, if we don't achieve unity, political unity, we cannot move into an economic unity because everybody is protecting themselves. Everybody is saying, just like you said, my sovereignty is, supreme. You can't. If we don't go beyond this, I think we have a problem on our hands. Give us your last shot, and then we'll come back again. Yes, the floor is yours, please.
Okay, I think we also have to discuss this.
Go ahead.
Do we have to solve these within a regional body or regional institution? Because the issue was that we've started discussing institutions. We know regional institutions. Let's just say the discussion today was about regional institutions and multilateral. We talked about ECOWAS, EAC. Do we have to do this through these institutions? Can these bodies be a body or an association where we work collectively on things instead of we've turned ECOWAS, SADC, EAC, the Central African Community of States into like a state on top of a state. Like now, people are saying ECOWAS needs to do more to stop the coups in West Africa. The East Africa community needs to do more to stop the conflict in Eastern Congo. SADC needs to do more to stop the issues that are happening in Mozambique, etc. If we really want to move forward, we have to accept that we have our own internal issues, and these internal issues have to be addressed first before we decide to go to the next level. The same thing will happen with the European Union. Political, yes, we need political power, but your political power also, to run your government, you need revenue, you need resources, you need money. So we can really create all these nice political institutions, but if there's no funding for them, then they're obsolete. Then they serve a purpose. And what they can do, they can even obviate economic development. They can abrogate social development. But if we focus on how do we lift people out of poverty, how do we create opportunities for people in their countries? How do we ensure that resources are distributed equity? How can we have diversity in our countries? How can we fight the challenges that plague us? Challenges of tribalism, challenges of corruption, poor institutions. These are legitimate issues we have to address. But now when you come to a regional body where you have countries who already have these challenges, it's difficult for them to mesh because you're coming, you have your own problems. That's why we have the finger pointing. They should deal with their problems. I have my problem. Yeah, but you deal with yours. Who are you to come and tell me, pointing the finger? And so it has to become where we talk about the institutions. Let's empower local institutions. Let's have a more localized approach where even in our countries, what works in certain parts of this country doesn't work in other parts of the country. We have diversity issues. We have all these issues that are facing people. Like now you look at the Congo. I mean, the Congo is a big country. What's happening in the eastern region, what's happening in northern Kivu, doesn't
Mhm.
some people there cannot relate as what's happening maybe in the eastern parts and the northern parts. And so you have that happening. So I firmly believe you have to look at the economic side because anything you want to do needs funding. The economic side is also, as your resources are being exploited and feeding the world, you need to maximize. You need to be getting more value for your resources. And more value for your resources means that you should no longer be relying on aid and assistance to feed your people when you have arable lands. You should no longer be relying on loans and support for your
Mhm.
governments. When your governments are overbloated, I mean, we spend so much. I mean, you look at any countries, I mean, even African powerhouses, look at their debt. I mean, Africa has a debt distress issue. Yeah. So economics is important. We need economic power. We need to max up like food security, poverty. We need those. Why are we poor? Because we don't know how to manage our resources and maximize our resources. We'd rather sell it to get a percentage than maximize and get the most value out of it.
I think next time we may have to look at AFCT, the African Free Trade thing that.
Those things are just nice acronyms.
I know, I know. We have to look
I
at
mean,
it.
there's COMESA,
Geez.
EFATC. There's all these. Now you have Now you have like Africa Development Bank, AFRIXM Bank, all these A something something. And now they're saying we need a seat in the. Okay, we say we want a seat in the United Nations, right? What is it going to change? We have the platforms to discuss these issues already. So if we get a seat, if we get a veto power in the United Nations General Assembly, number one, we're going to fight amongst each other because if Ghana has a veto power and it doesn't veto sanctions being imposed on Senegal, it's going to create problems in those countries.
Mhm.
Now imagine if, for example, Nigeria has a veto power and it votes for arms embargoes against Guinea or Mali or Niger. I mean, Nigeria also is going to take into account that we have a neighbor with Niger, so we're going to probably abstain. Now imagine the West coming here, forcing our hand and saying, you need to vote for sanctions on this country. And you're like, wait a second, those are my neighbors. If I sanction them, it's going to create problems back home.
But they do
And
it.
we want the
But they
platforms to
do it.
discuss this. Huh?
AKOL, they do it at the United Nations Security Council. They do it. They protect themselves.
Yeah.
Even though, say, if the United States says, we are vetoing this one, they all go with it. So there's got to be that understanding that, look here, we are going there to protect our interests because every country protects their interests or every region
Okay.
protects their interests. So I don't see any problem there in a way if we are to say if we have to sanction England and the British Prime Minister goes to that country and say, hey, if you do that, you are in big trouble, right? Then it means we are not serving our own interests out there. So,
but once again, it's a tool. Like the West is not going to give us a seat unless they think that seat they can benefit from it.
then we should
Right?
withdraw. Then we don't have to belong to any of these
But also, we have
institutions.
once again, it shows you that even we Africans, we believe the African Union is toothless because we're like, we need a seat at G10. We need a seat in BRICS. We need a seat in this. We need a seat in that. I mean, just pay attention. African countries are observer states in so many different institutions. Like, well, why? Okay, you can use your platform to discuss your issues facing your country, right? You don't have to necessarily be a member of the United Nations, a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. And we have non-permanent observer. But also, let's say the African Union has the seat. Countries can just leave the African Union. It's like, you know what? I'm president of this country. You put an arms embargo on me, I'm leaving the union.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just like how the three amigos have done in
in ECOWAS. They
in
said we're
ECOWAS.
leaving.
Yes, they are leaving, and if they tie in their economies together, it's bigger than the EU.
And you know, they said they want to create a confederation.
Yes,
They said
and
we're going to create a
you know,
confederation.
I'm in support of that. I'm in support of that. If it's going to, you see, if we do piecemeal economic kind of build piecemeal economic infrastructures, it doesn't help us. So if they can bring the economies together, right, as part of the confederation, I think it will go well for them, because right after Niger had said, France, get out of here. Now we got to know that the Nigerian economy is going to be one of the fastest growing in the world, right? It means, like I'm saying, if you pull in a rope and it's not coming your way, it means something is holding it. In this particular case, France was holding it. So in what I'm trying to say is that if something is not good for us, then we have to say that, okay, we don't like it. The fact is, not because that we don't like each other that we have to, continue to suffer. At some point in time, we may have to agree to disagree and then sit back and say, you know what? We've been taken for granted for far too long. The stakes are too high. We have what so many countries don't have. So many continents don't have. If we're talking in terms of economy, then we have something in there. We have trillions, quadrillions of mineral resources in the ground.
Yeah.
So why are we poor? Africa is not poor, but people of Africa are poor.
Okay, you mentioned, can I ask something about Niger?
Go ahead, please.
Niger is the third largest exporter of uranium.
Thank you.
And thorium ore in the world. But certain places in Niger don't have power. So Africa, let's say we want to talk about, why don't Africans say, let's build a big power plant in Niger to supply the region electricity? Because this is going to France to power French power, right? The same thing in Guinea. Guinea has one of the largest iron ore reserves, the Simandou iron ore reserves. I think you saw, I did a video about it. I think you saw that, right? I talked about that.
Yes.
That iron ore reserves, if you really, and then there's aluminum. There's so many resources in those countries alone. If you decide to say, can we produce these and make our own steel locally instead of importing? We can say we're no longer going to import goods. And even, okay, the best initiative that I like, honestly, I'm a critic of these bodies, but I have to be fair and give credit when credit is due, is the African Union's plan to have basically where countries trade in their currencies and they just do the balance of payments. So now if you have Naira and if you have South Sudanese pound, instead of having to, because basically if you have South Sudanese pound and then you have Naira, you have to go buy dollars and then go buy Naira. But now we can just say, hey, let's just trade with each other. So if you have Naira, Ghanaian cedi, you have Ugandan shilling, you have Angolan kwanza, Malawi kwacha, let's use those resources. If you can do that now, we will no longer need the dollar. We just trade in our currency. So if you have a big power plant in Niger, and that power plant can support West Africa, and then the Simandou iron ore, you can have aluminum. Then that power plant now, guess what's going to happen? You can have power, high-level power and cheap power, because nuclear power is very cheap. Now, Ghana can even start making cocoa factories. We can start having African chocolate. Okay, we have the iron ore. We have countries that have aluminum, countries that have bauxite, countries that have these resources. Why don't we make our own steel and make our own cars? You have rubber trees in Liberia, in Sierra Leone. I mean, you have trees. Legitimately, they make rubber. Yeah. We can make our own tires.
And I mean, from what you're saying, Ghana and Ivory Coast, we produce cocoa.
So why can't the value chain?
That's right. You put it together. So if we go into that region, Let me tell you something. When Kwame Nkrumah was in power, what he did was so smart. You go to the north, they rear cattle. So he put a corned beef meat production factory there, and then hides there.
Yeah.
Anytime it was strategic. So we can, if we
Yeah.
have to look at it from an African within an African context, we can do that. If we have solar power, we can develop
We have a lot of it.
a lot of it. So you see, it comes down sometimes. I sit back and pinch myself and saying, don't we have leaders who can think afar and then think that, you know what, apart from anything else, we have what it takes to take us to the next level and not even go to, say, the West or the East or wherever for medical treatment and all those kind of stuff. If you have the resources to build the infrastructure to support your medical infrastructure, then do it. But you see, we have misplaced values. We have misplaced values where sometimes I don't know. It's tough to sort of come to think about why we are not why we haven't been able to advance our our issues to a better place where everybody can enjoy. Because the fact of the matter is that we have everything, and at the same time we have nothing.
We have
Your
everything. We
passport,
have, even if you look at it, that's why I say people write about, oh, Guinea, a poor country. I mean, Niger, a poor country. I'm like, it's not a poor
it's
country.
not a book, yeah.
Maybe poorly managed. Let's say, like Africans, you can say we're poorly managed, but we're not poor.
Thank you.
Because if you look at the resources, okay, I want everybody who's listening, go and study the exports of every African country. Look at the amount of their exports, right? Okay, I'm from South Sudan. People say, okay, South Sudan, one of the poorest countries in Africa.
No,
South Sudan, we have the third largest oil reserves in sub-Saharan Africa
that's
after
right.
Nigeria and Angola. South Sudan has one of the largest gum arabic trees in the country. Gum arabic is a key tree that's using by international corporations like Pepsi, Coca-Cola, and it's an industry. South Sudan has the ability to produce maize, sorghum, sunflower, rice, sugarcane. I don't think we're a poor country. I just
No,
think that we haven't managed our potential. We don't manage our resources in the right way. But we can't be sold, you're poor, your people are begging. No, we haven't maximized our potential. We don't manage our resources right. We have food and arable land, and obviously security is a challenge that we have to admit
yeah,
is there. But also we have to shift the mindset. Instead of aid and assistance, we have to go towards strength and economic power. So you go to every country. Congo's not poor. Congo has cobalt. I
no,
mean, Angola is not poor.
no.
Namibia is not poor. Zimbabwe is not poor. Zambia is called the Copper Belt.
Every
Malawi
country
is
out
not
there,
poor.
every country out there,
Nobody's country is
no
poor.
country is poor. No country is poor
I
at
mean,
all.
like, what country? People say, okay, Niger is a desert. What do you mean it's a desert? Niger has uranium.
That's
Chad, oh,
gold.
Chad is Chad has oil. Chad had resources. All these countries you talk about, they have resources. But when you sell, part of propaganda of the West and of the society you live in is that when you sell this narrative that you guys are poor, you guys are beggars, you need our assistance,
Mhm.
we start to believe it. We start to believe it ourselves. When
Yeah,
you say these countries are poor, and part of their strategy is that, let's be honest, the strategy is to economically cripple us. So by the time we wake up, we owe them a lot of money. So at least they'll still make the money off of us.
yeah,
That's it.
yeah,
So now we decided to wake up, hey, well, let's make the most of our resources. Let's refine our crude. Let's produce our grains. Let's no longer beg. Imagine if we're no longer begging countries for grain. My goodness, why are we begging for food? In the 1930s and 40s, 30% of Europe's food, I mean of England's food during the Second World War, came from its African colonies. 30%. And remember, their African colony wasn't all of Africa. That's Sudan, that's Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, Ghana, Nigeria. These are British colonies. So if these countries, the former British colonies, were supplying 30% of uh, the food supply during world, and also some of our people went and fought on behalf of the British. Imagine if we started to produce those ourselves.
yeah.
Imagine that.
Yeah, yeah. You know, my brother, AKOL, it's been great. It seems a lot of people are enjoying the program, and you know what? We'll be back at it again because you know what? We have a lot of discussions on Africa because we love
Hmm.
Africa. Africa was born in us.
Yes.
We'll continue to support and then do whatever we can to make sure that Africa is right there. Africa is not poor. You know what, folks?
Yes.
Until we meet again and next time around, well, we are having technological challenges, but at the end of the day, we have made it up to this far. And AKOL, it was a pleasure.
Hmm.
Come back again. We have to continue to do this over and over and over and over
We
again.
have to do it. And one day I need to come in studio.
You got to come. You got to come. And you know what?
I
A
need to
lot of people
come
are,
to
yeah, they are sending so many texts and now they are enjoying the conversation. And you know what? It's not an interview, folks. On Love the Afrobeat
it's
Music
a
Talk Radio, we
discussion.
don't. It's a discussion. So you can join us every Saturday here at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Your number one African Caribbean online radio. It was a pleasure having a conversation with Mr. AKOL Dog. AKOL, before we leave, just tell the listeners and the viewers out there what Oros Consulting is all about. And then we'll just call it a day.
Oris Consulting is about the prior division for Oris is building the capacity of the private sector. And part of the things that we focus on is the business advisory and strategic advisory, where here in South Sudan and in Africa, we want to support companies and startups develop the organizational plan, develop their capacity, do policies and those sorts of things. So the idea of Oris Consulting is building the capacity. In our advisory, we have communications, strategic communication advisory, public relations, media, business communications. How can you better improve the communication of your business, and how can you get more clients? And strategic advisory, how can we guide our clients in managing their portfolios, making strategic plans, and how can they grow their businesses further?
And folks, with that, we end today's edition of Today's Africa. You know what? AKOL, you didn't give your social media platform where people can reach you.
Okay, if you guys are on Twitter and Instagram, my name is Akol N Dog. So AKOLNDOK. That's on Twitter. On Facebook, you can find my profile is just Akol Doc, and this is actually streaming on that Facebook. So Akol Doc, you'll find my picture there, the same picture they use on the artwork. Um, and if you want to email me, my email is Akol AKOL at gmail.com. But feel free to reach out. You'll find me on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, on all these platforms. On LinkedIn, I'll call Doc. If you want to reach out, ask questions, we want to have discussions. And let's keep having these discussions.
Yes, we will continue to have these, discussions. And folks, thank you for your time and space. But hey, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it, and join us again every Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we have conversations about Africa. And on that note, take care of yourselves and each other. We'll meet in 7 days. Bye bye.
Bye.